Welcome to Cheat House. Let's get started with today's story. You know how they say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Mine wasn't. It was a train wreck, a catastrophe. I met Clara 3 years ago. She was stunning, sharp, and had this infectious laugh that could disarm even the most hardened skeptic. From the moment I saw her, I was hooked. We had our ups and downs like any couple. But when I proposed, I thought we'd faced every storm there was to weather. Turns out I was wrong. It started 1 week before the wedding. I was at my buddy Matt's apartment, unwinding after a long day. Matt's the kind of guy who's a little too honest sometimes, but he's loyal to a fault. Over a beer, he hesitated before saying, "James, there's something I think you should know. That phrase is never followed by anything good." "What's up?" I asked, setting my beer down. He rubbed the back of his neck and avoided my eyes. "You sure about Clara, man?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Of course I'm sure." "All right, don't shoot the messenger, but—" He paused, clearly trying to find the right words. "I saw Clara last Friday at Charlie's bar. She wasn't alone." I laughed, more out of disbelief than humor. "Matt, come on. She was probably just out with her friends." "Yeah, that's what I thought too, until I saw her kissing some guy. And not a friendly peck, James. Full-on, world-ending kind of kiss." I didn't believe him. Not at first. I told myself Matt must have been mistaken, that maybe Clara had a look-alike wandering the city. But something in the pit of my stomach felt off. I couldn't shake the unease. So I went home, trying to push it out of my mind. But I couldn't. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, Matt's words echoed in my head. She wasn't alone. Kissing some guy. A full-on, world-ending kind of kiss. It didn't make sense. Clara and I were happy, or at least I thought we were. But what if Matt wasn't mistaken? What if the woman I was about to marry wasn't who I thought she was? The next morning, I decided to pay closer attention. Subtle things started standing out. The way she kept her phone screen tilted away from me, the occasional late-night texts she said were from work, the slight tension in her voice when I asked about her plans. At one point, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages. But there was nothing. No incriminating texts, no calls from unknown numbers. It was all clean. Too clean, almost. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So the next time Clara said she was going out, I decided to follow her. For the next few days, she didn't go out at all. But 2 days before the wedding, Clara got dressed up more than usual. She wore a fitted dress and high heels, her makeup flawless. As she twirled in front of the mirror, clearly pleased with her appearance, she said, "Tomorrow's the day we follow the tradition where the groom can't see the bride the day before the wedding, so I'll be staying at Sarah's house tonight. I'm heading out with Sarah and some of the girls," she continued, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "We're looking at a few things for the wedding and then maybe grabbing a bite. After that, I'll head to Sarah's." "Okay," I muttered, though the words barely left my lips. My mind was already elsewhere, following the trail of suspicion. As soon as she left, I grabbed my jacket, determined not to let this moment slip by. I had to know the truth. I followed her in my car, keeping a safe distance. She drove through the city, weaving through streets, but eventually, she pulled over to the side of the road in a quiet neighborhood. My heart raced as I watched her stop the car, get out, and stand by the curb as if waiting for someone. I waited, barely breathing, watching her every move. Then the man showed up. He approached her, his body language easy and confident. He was taller, wearing a dark jacket, and I didn't recognize him. He greeted her with a smile, and before I knew it, they were kissing. Full on, lips pressing together with an intensity that made my stomach twist. My world seemed to collapse right there in that moment. Clara, the woman I was about to marry, was kissing someone else like it was nothing. I couldn't let it go unnoticed. My hand shaking, I quickly reached for my phone and snapped a few photos. The flash was dim, hidden in the dark of my car, but the images were clear. Her lips against his, her eyes closed in passion. I felt sick, but I kept snapping the photos, proof that I wasn't imagining this. They pulled apart, exchanged a few quick words, and got into her car. They drove off, and I immediately started my car again, tailing them. I followed them for miles, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief, until they finally pulled into a hotel parking lot. The building was quiet, tucked away on a side street. Nothing too fancy, but certainly not a place you'd expect a couple to just hang out. They got out of the car, and I stayed hidden behind a row of vehicles, watching them walk toward the entrance. My stomach churned as I took out my phone again, snapping a few more pictures of them walking toward the hotel. Clara's hand was tucked into his. The way they leaned into each other, as if they were the only two people in the world. I couldn't just let it go. With my heart in my throat, I parked a little farther down and followed them into the hotel. At the front desk, the receptionist greeted me, and I took a deep breath before asking, "Can you tell me which room Clara Collins is in?" The receptionist frowned, glancing down at his computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a reservation under that name." I felt my stomach drop, but kept my composure. "I mean the woman who just walked in a couple of minutes ago with the guy. What room are they in?" The receptionist's eyes shifted nervously. "I'm afraid I can't give you that information, sir." I leaned forward, my voice lowering as I tried to stay calm. "Look, I'm about to marry that woman, and I just saw her walk in here with another man. I need to know what room they're in." The receptionist hesitated, his eyes darting around the lobby as if to make sure no one else was listening. I can't. It's against the policy to give out guest information," he said, clearly uncomfortable. I took a deep breath, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. Just tell me which room they're in. I need to know." The receptionist sighed, glancing over his shoulder before leaning in slightly. "Room 312. But please, don't cause a scene." I nodded quickly and gave a tight smile, walking away before he could change his mind. I made my way up to the third floor, my mind racing. I stood outside their door, my ear pressed against the wood as muffled laughter and voices drifted through. Through the walls, I could hear the man's low chuckle and Clara's voice chiming in softly. The sound twisted something deep inside me, but I stayed still, absorbing every moment. They were so at ease, as if I didn't exist. I couldn't just leave now. I needed to hear more, needed to know what was happening between them. I quickly glanced down the hall, then back to the door. Without thinking, I walked to the front desk and booked the room next to theirs, room 311. I couldn't stand the thought of just standing there outside their door, so close yet so far from the truth. When I returned, I slipped into the new room quietly. I leaned against the wall by the door, waiting for the sounds to continue. Through the thin walls, I could still hear the laughter, muffled but unmistakable. I held my breath, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. I didn't want to know this. I shouldn't even be here, but I couldn't stop myself. I slowly pushed open the balcony door of my room to step outside for a clear view, hoping to catch a glimpse of them through the open sliding doors of their room. As soon as I stepped outside, I froze. I heard the unmistakable sound of their balcony door sliding open. I rushed back inside, heart pounding. I pressed my back against the wall as quietly as I could. I didn't want them to see me, didn't want to be caught. Through the thin wall between our rooms, I could hear them laughing again, then footsteps as they both stepped outside onto their balcony. They stood there for a while, talking softly, too far for me to hear their words, but close enough for me to feel the weight of their presence. It seemed like an eternity before they went back inside, and I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know for sure. I looked down at the balconies separating our rooms. The gap between the two wasn't wide enough to stop me. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself to move. Creeping along the edge of the building, I jumped lightly, landing on their balcony with barely a sound. Slowly, I approached the sliding door, my hands trembling. I reached out and pushed it just slightly, enough to see inside. Through the gap, I could see them in the dim light of the room, tangled in the sheets. They were kissing, hard, desperate kisses. Their clothes began to come off, piece by piece, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. My whole world was spinning as I watched it unfold. I didn't want to do this, didn't want to see it, but I couldn't look away. In a panic, I pulled out my phone, trying to stay as silent as possible, not making a single noise. My breath hitched as I started recording, standing there just behind the curtains, watching as they continued, oblivious to my presence. Every second felt like an eternity. I kept recording them for about a minute, feeling both sick and numb, unsure of what to do next. Finally, I stepped back as quietly as I could, carefully jumping back onto my own balcony. My legs were shaking beneath me as I stood there for a moment, heart still pounding in my chest, trying to process everything I had just witnessed. I couldn't believe what was happening. Clara, the woman I was about to marry, was cheating on me just 2 days before our wedding. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, and I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend the gravity of what I had witnessed. She had been the one I trusted, the one I planned my life with, and yet here she was intimately involved with another man. I drove back home, the weight of what I had discovered pressing heavily on me. That night, I knew she would be staying at Sarah's place, but as I sat in the silence of our home, all I could think about was how to make her feel the pain I was going through. The anger inside me was burning, and the thought of her walking down the aisle in 2 days, pretending everything was perfect, made my blood boil. I needed to take control. I needed to expose everything she'd done, everything she thought she could hide from me. I needed revenge, and I was going to get it. The wedding day arrived, and as the guests began to gather at the venue, the anticipation in the air was palpable. Clara was there, as were the other guests, chatting and enjoying the moment. The room gradually quieted as everyone took their seats, waiting for the ceremony to begin. As the guests settled in, I stood up. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the room, clear and steady. "Before we begin the ceremony, I'd like to share something with all of you." All eyes turned to me, and for a moment, the entire room fell into silence. The atmosphere shifted, curiosity hanging in the air. I took a deep breath, knowing exactly what I was about to do. I know you've all been looking forward to the ceremony, but before we move on, I want to show you some of the best moments Clara and I have shared together. I continued, then my voice was surprisingly calm considering the storm raging inside me. Our trips, our laughter, our love, all of it, I began. A few people smiled, clearly thinking I was about to share something sweet and sentimental. The projector behind me flickered to life, and the first photos appeared on the screen. Clara and I were smiling, hugging, laughing together on various trips. Pictures of what looked like a perfect couple. For a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of guilt. Almost. But that feeling quickly disappeared. Slowly, the photos changed. The next image appeared on the screen. Clara kissing another man. The room fell into stunned silence. Whispers began to ripple through the guests. People exchanged confused glances, unsure of what they were seeing. A few of them looked to Clara, their faces filled with shock. Clara's face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth as she gasped. Her eyes flickered between the screen and me, a look of pure panic flashing across her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then, without warning, the screen shifted again. The video began to play. Clara and the man in her hotel room, oblivious to my presence. The footage showed them in bed, kissing, undressing. My stomach turned as I heard the sounds of their intimacy, sounds I had never imagined I'd be hearing on the day I was supposed to marry her. The entire room went dead silent, then gasps. The guests began whispering, some standing up in shock, others pointing, some too stunned to even speak. The atmosphere turned from confusion to anger. I heard muttered voices, accusatory glances. "What is this?" someone shouted. "Is this for real? This is insane." Another voice rang out. Clara's face went white as she stood frozen, realizing what was happening. The color drained from her face, her hands trembling. The man she'd been with, the one I had never known, was nowhere to be found, but her betrayal was exposed for everyone to see. The truth hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating everyone in the room. "James, what is this?" Clara finally stammered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" "You've been caught, Clara," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm done. The wedding's off. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I won't pretend anymore." She started to shake her head, but the damage had been done. The room erupted in arguments, people shouting at Clara, at me. Some were angry with her. Others were in disbelief. But all I could do was stand there, feeling numb. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The truth was out, and now nothing would ever be the same. Clara stood there trembling as the room erupted in chaos, her eyes wide with disbelief. But there was no sympathy left in me. She had betrayed me, and no amount of explanation could fix it now. "James, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice cracking. But I couldn't listen anymore. The damage had been done. The guests were divided, some furious with her, others still in shock, but I didn't care. The woman I had loved, the woman I was about to marry, wasn't the person I thought she was. I turned away, not wanting to see her anymore. The wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives was now a nightmare. She wasn't the future I had imagined. Without a word, Clara turned and walked out. People tried to console her, but I didn't move. There was no going back. The truth had been exposed, and I was free. As the room emptied and the guests left, I felt a strange mix of relief and pain. The woman I had once trusted was gone, and so was the life I thought we would have. In the days that followed, I received messages of sympathy, but I wasn't interested. Clara was gone, and so was the life I had planned with her. It wasn't easy, but as time passed, I moved on. I realized the betrayal hurt, but what hurt more was the realization that I had ignored the signs. Still, I was free, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. Thank you for watching.